The title in front of you talks about an old book and a quiet man who had a loud voice for many years. The book of Jeremiah is not a quick story, and it doesn't have a lot of victories. It moves slowly, like the air at night, settling over stone streets. It has warnings that are spoken with sadness, tears that are carried in silence, and hope that waits without asking for attention. This story is about patience and pain, and it is told through long nights and prayers that go unanswered. It doesn't hurry the listener. It only asks that you stay still long enough to hear what was said in the dark. The story tonight will unfold slowly, without any stress or rush. We will go through the life of Jeremiah, a man who was asked to speak when few wanted to hear him. He didn't say things to make people feel better about their pride. He said things to get to the parts of people that they tried to hide. You will hear about a city that kept going about its business even though its heart was far away. Leaders who liked quiet sounds more than honest ones, and a voice that stayed steady even when the ground beneath it felt shaky. Every moment will come in its own time, without being forced or rushed. As this story goes on, people will pay attention to both what happens and how it feels. The sound of footsteps on quiet paths, the pause before words are spoken, and the weight that comes with breathing. Jeremiah's story has a lot of long parts where nothing seems to happen on the surface, but everything changes underneath. These are the places where reflection happens. They let the mind slow down, drift off, and rest while you listen. The book doesn't move meaning forward. It lets meaning sit there until the heart is ready to notice it. This story is also shaped by differences. There are both loud gatherings and quiet tears. Public rituals go on, but private devotion fades. Jeremiah stands between these two worlds, telling the truth that doesn't make him feel better. People often turn their backs on him and shut doors when he talks. He still stays. He still talks. Not because it will help, but because not speaking would be harder. This steady presence gives the book its quiet strength, which is strong but doesn't want to be noticed and never goes away. It seems right to hear this story late at night. There are fewer things to do at night. Thoughts flow more freely when there isn't a lot of noise. In these times, Jeremiah's voice seems closer to me, not so far away in time. His cries fit in well with the quiet around you. His pauses seem natural. His patience is like the slow beat of the dark. This is not a story that should be read quickly during the day. It belongs to shadows, to soft edges, and to the quiet space between being awake and being asleep. The book of Jeremiah talks about loss a lot, but it never completely lets go of care. A steady worry about what could still be healed lies beneath warnings and sadness. The book doesn't say that things will change quickly. It talks about waiting, about being patient, and about hearts slowly learning to listen again. This calm tension is present on every page. People feel it more than they can explain it. It settles down slowly, just like tired thoughts do when they go to sleep. The focus will stay close and personal as we move forward. This is not only the account of a prophet and a city. It reflects the inner struggles that repeat across time. Moments of resistance, moments of doubt, moments where truth feels heavy, yet necessary. Jeremiah's life becomes a mirror that anyone can look into without being told to or judged. The story gives the listener room to breathe, think, and not feel rushed. Everything here will come in bits and pieces. Each piece will fit where it belongs and connect to the next without any sharp turns. The rhythm will stay calm, which will help you stay relaxed and free of stress. The path ahead doesn't need clear outlines, like a quiet road in the dark. It just needs to be there. The story doesn't move quickly. Instead, It moves slowly, naturally, toward a voice that will soon explain why these words still matter when spoken slowly, long after the noise has stopped. As the story gets quieter, it becomes clear that this telling fits into a certain kind of space. This is a place where you can listen instead of react, and be still instead of hurry. There are times like this when the world outside gets dark and the mind starts to let go of the day. That's when late night devotion comes in. It's a place where old words can breathe again, not in bright lights, but in the soft light of night, where they were first spoken and heard. The goal of this channel was simple: to sit with old texts and let their voices come back without modern noise getting in the way. Many of these writings lived quietly on the edges of history, passed down through memory, copied by hand in silence, or kept alive by small groups long after louder voices had moved on. As time went on, some of these stories were pushed aside, shortened, softened, or even forgotten. Not always erased in anger, but often forgotten because it feels good and is a habit. This is where those quieter strands are given space again, not to argue or convince, but to remember. The goal is not to give the listener too much information, but to let tones that have been forgotten come back naturally. People who were afraid, unsure, and waiting a long time used to tell these stories to each other. They were meant for people whose hearts were hurting, not for people whose minds were racing to find something new. That original goal starts to feel closer in the quiet of night. The information shared here is often not found in well-known summaries. It comes from the edges, from parts that were ignored, and from voices that didn't fit into neat boxes. Some of these voices were pushed into footnotes over time, while others were taken out of common reading altogether. But they were never completely gone. It stayed quietly, waiting for times when listening was more important than being sure. Late-night devotion does not want to bring noise back to these texts. It lets them stay calm. People read each story slowly, believing that the meaning will come to them in time. You don't have to hurry to find answers. A lot of the time, the truest understanding takes time to settle, like breathing evening out after a long day. This is why the night is important here. The dark does not bother. It protects. You don't have to agree or disagree while you listen. You are only asked to stay. These stories are what they are, shaped by age, struggle, and staying strong. They are not ready to be shown off. They are worn, and sometimes they are heavy, and sometimes they are soft. Their strength doesn't come from force, but from staying strong. The book of Jeremiah fits perfectly in this area. It was never meant to be funny. They were spoken into resistance, into tiredness, and into times when truth didn't seem welcome. That same quality lets the book fit in well here, next to other accounts that survived not because they were easy, but because they were taken care of. The goal of this channel is still the same: to let the night do what it does best, to calm the surface, to make the edges less sharp, and to let voices that had been quiet speak again, not loudly, but clearly enough for those who are still awake, listening, and slowly falling asleep. Before we fully get into the story of Jeremiah, it seems right to take a moment of silence together to honor this shared space. Late-night devotion does well not only because of the stories, but also because of the bond that forms when someone chooses to sit still and listen. Every view, every presence, even when you're not saying anything, is important. This is a gentle reminder that these words, which have been passed down through the years, are still alive because they are received slowly and carefully by people who care. If you like this quiet place, there is a subtle way to help it, so that these soft stories can keep reaching people who need peace at night. When you subscribe, you join a small but steady group of people who value taking their time over rushing. Each like gently shows that the stories were carefully put together, and each share quietly sends them to someone else who needs peace. There is no hurry or need, just the quiet recognition that every presence helps the stories come to life again. The goal here is not to force people to pay attention, but to let it happen on its own. Even the smallest act, like sending a super thanks, means something. It makes it clear that keeping these quiet, forgotten voices, those that have been gently removed from history or buried in the margins, is important. Every little bit helps the channel keep the patience and care it needs to bring these words to life every night. The numbers or loud praise don't define this community, but the goal is still there. A quiet desire to get 10,000 subscribers, not as a sign of success, but as a group of people who are willing to stop and listen. Every time someone joins this peaceful gathering, it widens the circle of attention, letting more hearts hear stories that had been forgotten. These actions, liking, sharing, subscribing, and supporting, keep the stories safe. They get a kind of soft immortality that isn't forced on them, but comes from consistent care. The channel's work goes on quietly in the background of many nights, but it has a big impact on keeping history and reflection alive in small, important ways. So, before we go back to Jeremiah's world, it's nice to know that this quiet ritual of paying attention is shared, that someone, somewhere, has stopped moving long enough to join in this stillness. It sets the mood for the story that follows, letting its weight settle slowly, like a long breath that lasts all night, so the listener can be present, pay attention, and feel connected. This makes the channel itself a part of the story. It is not just a medium. It is a witness to silence, a place to store memories, and a soft guide through the long night. And in this space, Jeremiah's words, which are full of patience and sadness, can be heard as they were meant to be, softly, slowly, and with a calm that reaches the listener in the quietest hours. Jeremiah's story starts long before the city around him would shake with fear and distant rumblings of exile. When he was called early, his understanding of the world was still growing, and the soft edges of childhood had not yet become hard facts. Even then, the voice that would lead him came softly, almost timidly, asking him to take on a duty that seemed too heavy for his small shoulders to carry. It wasn't a sudden order or a loud announcement. It was a quiet demand, like the first cold wind of evening brushing against the face and reminding you that something you can't see is waiting for you to notice it. Jeremiah could tell from the start that his heart was beating differently. He often stopped to listen to distant whispers and notice things that other kids thought were unimportant while they were playing and laughing. But these little things, these small signs of sensitivity, would later become the very things he used as a prophet. His calling was connected to being aware of the cracks in the walls, the sighs hidden between words, and the silences that spoke louder than any ceremony or announcement. These important times in his life happened in his simple, unassuming home. In even the most normal places, the courtyard, the well, and the quiet rooms where the evening stretched on, he felt a certain stillness pressing in, as if time itself were bending towards something he couldn't see. He sometimes wondered if he was imagining it, but deep down he knew that the voice he would follow was not his own. It came from a presence that was much older, much more patient, and yet very aware of how weak people are. Jeremiah was different in those early days because he was aware. His friends and neighbors sometimes thought his pauses were strange and that his questions went deeper than what was going on in everyday life. He didn't talk much about what was going on inside him, not because he wanted to keep it a secret, but because he thought the words weren't enough to show how deep it was. The divine's quiet presence was gentle but demanding. It told him to listen first, understand later, and only speak when he could handle the truth without faltering. Jeremiah's character slowly changed in this time of preparation and inner listening, not through teaching, but through repeated experiences with silence and observation. Patience was honed. Empathy increased, not through encouragement, but by observing the unarticulated challenges of others. He started to notice how easily people ignored signs of trouble, and how often hearts hardened against messages that called for change, even when he was young. These early experiences would later have a profound impact on him, giving him the strength to accept a calling that few could handle and to speak truths that were uncomfortable but necessary. He would walk alone along the paths of his village at night, feeling the shadows grow longer and the wind carry whispers from places he couldn't see. During those hours, he learned to trust a quiet rhythm and a soft voice that never pushed him, but also never left him. When he was a boy, the call he heard wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was patient, persistent, and gentle in its insistence. He realized that being chosen was not a comfort or a privilege. It was a duty that required courage, hidden in silence, and strength that came from thinking about himself. As this first chapter comes to an end, we can see the beginning of Jeremiah's journey. The boy who listened, stopped, and saw what others missed would become the prophet who could speak even when no one wanted to hear. The soft beginnings of his awareness, the slow shaping of his patience, and the quiet acceptance of a heavy calling set the tone for everything that came after. In these soft, early moments, the story begins to take shape. The night waits to carry it deeper into the life of a man who has chosen to be quiet, sad, and always watchful. The city around Jeremiah grew as he did. Jerusalem had its own rhythm, with narrow streets and stone-paved courtyards. It went from busy to quiet, from devotion to distraction. During the day, merchants would softly call to each other across the market, and the sound of children laughing would echo through the air. The smell of fresh bread would mix with the dust on the paths. By nightfall, things moved more slowly. Torches flickered in doorways. The wind carried whispers through the alleys, and the city seemed to breathe in a way that could almost be felt. As things moved around him, Jeremiah became more aware of things that other people might not have seen, like leaders' hesitant glances, the quiet worry behind hurried footsteps, and the small acts of kindness that might have gone unnoticed. Jerusalem was a lively but fragile place to live. The city was beautiful, but it was also tense because the people were always moving between hope and worry. The walls of the temples echoed with prayers, and the streets below were full of everyday people who didn't always know what was going on around them. Jeremiah listened not only for words, but also for the spaces between them. He saw how easily comfort could hide neglect, how ritual could hide indifference, and how even the holy places that were meant for reflection and humility could turn into places of performance instead of devotion. During these years, he started to feel a kind of collective heartbeat that changed with both faith and doubt. Some elders had authority that people respected, but their actions showed that they were too comfortable. Families had problems they didn't talk about, and the city itself seemed to have secrets hidden away in quiet places or behind closed doors. Jeremiah's job, which he quietly took on even before he fully understood it, was to see these small details and understand the city not just by its buildings, but also by its hidden currents. Jerusalem's culture was full of history, but it was also full of hope. Ceremonies and rituals kept things in order, but the same things that were supposed to strengthen faith sometimes made people lazy. Jeremiah's sensitivity was both a blessing and a curse in this complicated world. He could see the difference between how things looked and how they really were. But just knowing wasn't enough. He needed courage to speak, patience to wait, and strength to deal with the rejection that often followed. Every second he spent watching the city prepared him for the hard work that lay ahead. It taught him how heavy the burden of responsibility is when you see clearly while others look away. The nights in the city taught their own lessons. When merchants closed their shops and the last lamps went out, the quiet made hidden patterns show up. Most people didn't notice the sounds that became clear. The soft rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant footsteps of people walking carefully through narrow streets, and the low murmur of conversations that could be heard through walls. During these quiet hours, Jeremiah's mind became clearer. His understanding of how fragile people are grew deeper, and the whispers of fate that would later shape his life began to be heard. Jeremiah saw moments of grace in the middle of the city's normal life. A neighbor gives a poor person a warm meal. A teacher helps a child with patience, and a family quietly mourns a loss. These little acts of care were important and would have an effect on him later. They reminded him that even in a world that was becoming more neglectful, there were still threads of kindness, compassion, and hope. These kinds of things helped him become more empathetic, which would help him deal with the problems that would come when the city lost interest and disaster struck. Jerusalem, with all of its problems, became a living teacher. Jeremiah's life was not just a backdrop for the streets, walls, and people who lived there. They were also active participants in shaping his awareness. The city's rhythms, the way light and shadow played off each other, and the way devotion and distraction came and went, all taught me how to be patient, watchful, and discerning. Jeremiah started to develop the strength and insight he needed to deliver messages that many people would not want to hear. These messages required both courage and gentleness to deliver. And so, in the quiet of early evenings and the soft sounds of the city's hidden places, Jeremiah kept growing, not just in knowledge, but also in readiness. Jerusalem's rhythms taught him that seeing clearly was just the first step. To really understand something, he had to think about it. He also learned that watching the little things in life quietly often revealed truths that were much bigger than what he could see right away. It was here, in the everyday but deep currents of Jerusalem, that the foundation for his prophetic journey slowly took shape, like a steady undercurrent beneath the surface of a city that was both alive and fragile. Jeremiah's knowledge of the everyday soon mixed with visions that were anything but normal. The pictures of an almond tree and a boiling pot were some of the most vivid. These symbols came quietly, but they had a lot more meaning than they seemed to at first. The almond tree, which had delicate and almost fragile first blooms, stood for being watchful, a gentle reminder that life moves slowly, but on purpose. Its branches reached up to the sky with a quiet insistence, teaching patience without saying a word. Jeremiah saw it in his mind's eye, and from that, he began to understand the subtle rhythms of being alert and how important it is to notice things that other people might miss. In contrast, the boiling pot talked about change and urgency, about forces coming together without being seen until they couldn't be stopped. It was different from the almond tree's calm patience. It had a simmering tension that needed to be noticed. Jeremiah felt its warning deep inside. not as a threat, but as a call to think. He knew that things that seem small at first, like the slow rise of heat and the faint hiss of bubbling liquid, can, over time, lead to changes that change what is familiar. He started to see the city, the people, and the events happening around him through these two visions, which were different but connected. There were no explanations for these pictures. They came quietly, when I was alone, or when I was taking a break from prayer or thought. Jeremiah's job wasn't to figure them out right away. Instead, he was supposed to sit with them and let their meaning slowly reveal itself, like watching shadows grow longer across a courtyard at dusk. The almond tree made him think that paying close attention could show him things that his eyes might miss. The boiling pot made him think that ignoring, being too comfortable, or denying could lead to things that no one wanted to see. They had a quiet conversation about caution and foresight, patience and urgency. In the middle of the city, these visions became anchors. Jeremiah would walk down streets he knew well and silently connect what he saw to the symbols in his head. A merchant who stopped to count coins reminded him of how slowly and steadily the almond tree grew. A fight between neighbors reminded him of how the pot was boiling. He learned through these thoughts that visions were not far-off ideas. They were closely connected to the lives going on around him, and gave him advice in the subtle language of everyday life. Jeremiah's inner practice changed over time because of these symbols. The almond tree taught him to be patient, to watch, and to grow understanding without hurrying. The boiling pot taught him how to spot warning signs, how to expect the natural end of hidden tensions, and how to act clearly when the time came. This way, he learned to be both patient and aware at the same time, which helped him when he needed to get through doubt, distraction, or resistance with his words. The visions taught them lessons, even when they were quiet. Jeremiah would close his eyes at night and let the almond tree and the boiling pot float in front of him. He knew that meaning often came slowly. Not rushing to a conclusion brought insight. Instead, it was taking the time to let the image settle in his mind that brought it about. The process itself taught him to be mindful and pay attention, which would help him get through the hard times that were coming. These early visions helped him build the base of his prophetic ability. He was learning to look beyond the present, to read signs with care, and to carry messages that were too important to be spoken lightly. The almond tree and the boiling pot, which were quiet but vivid, became friends as he prepared, leading him to an understanding that was both kind and careful, thoughtful and forward-looking. So, in these soft, symbolic moments, the young Jeremiah learned the rhythm of prophecy, not as a loud announcement, but as a slow, careful unfolding of insight that would change how he understood the world and how he spoke to it. As Jeremiah got better at his job, the weight of what he knew became more and more real. The city around him was changing, and so were the people who lived there. Their daily lives went on as usual. Their markets thrived, and the rhythms of daily life made them feel like everything was stable. But underneath this calm surface, things were tense. Jeremiah saw these small changes and thought about how fear, pride, or neglect could quietly take hold in ways that were almost invisible. The city didn't seem to notice the slow but sure patterns forming around it, but he could feel them strongly, like how you can feel the wind change before a storm comes. Jeremiah's words started to come together during these years, but they were rarely spoken freely. He would think about the visions he had, like the almond tree and the boiling pot, and then gently turn them into words that people could understand. He would see the boiling pot simmering in miniature when a neighbor fought with a friend over small things. He would also see the almond tree's patience in small gestures. When a child learned to take care of a younger sibling, his lessons were based on careful observation, and he didn't push them on people. Instead, he quietly insisted on them, like when someone realizes the truth in silence. Jeremiah faced opposition even as he got older. Some elders and leaders liked the familiar patterns of ceremonies and rituals because they were afraid that honest words would cause trouble. A lot of people turned away, politely nodding their heads while their hearts stayed far away. But the young prophet didn't give up. He had learned that being persistent didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant being there, being patient, and knowing that saying things too soon might not be heard by people who weren't ready to hear them. His early lessons in being quiet and paying attention became very important tools that helped him find the right balance between telling the truth and staying connected. The nights in the city were a good time to think. Jeremiah would walk through dark streets with lantern light flickering on the stone walls. The quiet would help him think. These nighttime walks helped me learn how to listen. I listened to the soft rustling of leaves, the distant hum of conversations, and the silence of unspoken tensions. During these hours, he worked on his ability to understand others by learning to see and hear both what was said and what was not said, as well as what was visible and what was hidden. The night gave me a chance to think about the weight of my responsibilities without being distracted. It was a time when small insights came to me naturally, not because I was trying to force them or hurry them along. At the same time, he started to see how weak influence can be. It's possible to misinterpret even the most careful words, and even the most gentle advice could be turned down. But speaking, when done with patience and awareness, still had a quiet power. He learned that prophecy wasn't always loud or celebrated by having small moments of understanding, like when someone listened carefully, their heart softened, or they briefly acknowledged the truth. Its effects often took time to show up, like a tree growing stronger over time in the ground. Jeremiah also saw how people acted in the same way over and over again. People looked for comfort in routine, safety in things they were used to, and reassurance in rituals. But these habits could make them blind to the effects that were building up below the surface, like the boiling pot that appeared in his visions. He learned to tell the difference between short-lived distractions and long-term patterns that shaped the city's path by watching without judging. This clear way of seeing things became one of his greatest strengths. It helped him know when to speak up and when to be patient. During these formative years, the young prophet's life was full of contrasts, quiet reflection and simmering unrest, routine and vigilance, acceptance and resistance. Every experience reinforced the lessons he learned from his visions, making them more real in the context of everyday life. The almond tree and the boiling pot were no longer just symbols. They were ways for him to see how people act, how change happens, and how important it is to pay close attention all the time. Jeremiah's maturity was not based on how many years he had lived or how many awards he had won. Instead, it was based on how deeply he understood things, how steady he was, and how quietly he spoke and acted. The city's pulse, the weight of its pasts, and the unspoken movements of its people shaped him and got him ready to send messages that would be hard to hear, but impossible to ignore. Days went by, and during those days, there were times when Jeremiah's will was quietly tested. Even in a city where rituals and traditions are common, he started to feel the tension between what people see and what is true. People went through the motions of devotion, but their hearts often went somewhere else. Leaders were very careful when they led ceremonies, but sometimes their choices didn't take into account justice, mercy, or the needs of the most vulnerable. Jeremiah saw these small things, not with anger or judgment, but with a calm attention that let him see the deeper forces that were shaping the city. These observations made the weight of his calling more real to him. Speaking the truth was not just about getting messages across. It was also about keeping faith in what couldn't be seen and hope alive when many couldn't see it anymore. Jeremiah knew that words alone couldn't change behavior. They had to touch the soul and reach quiet places where people could start to think. He was aware of this, so he was careful, deliberate, and patient. He never rushed or forced anything, but he was always ready to say what needed to be said at the right time. He found comfort in the quiet nights of the city. As he walked through the dark streets, he heard things that other people missed. The quiet conversations behind closed doors, the faint sighs carried by the wind, and the small movements of shadows. These sounds weren't just background noise. They were lessons in how to pay attention and reminders that life often speaks softly when it matters most. Jeremiah's understanding of his world grew deeper in this way, and his visions, the almond tree and the boiling pot, continued to guide him, showing him layers of meaning that he could only see by carefully observing and thinking about them. Resistance stayed the same, even as he got better at reading these signs. Some people turned away because they didn't like what he said, while others questioned his motives. But he had learned that opposition didn't always mean failure. It was often a test of strength, a chance to stay true to his beliefs without using force. Being patient became a habit that changed his personality and got him ready for the hard years ahead, when the city would face problems that no one could ignore. In the midst of the quiet, small acts of kindness also stood out. These simple acts of kindness, like a neighbor giving food to the poor, a teacher patiently helping kids, or a family quietly caring for each other, were just as important as visions or prophecies. They reminded Jeremiah that even in a world full of distractions, there were threads of attention and care that made daily life more resilient. His awareness of these moments gave him hope and kept him grounded in the sadness and warning that he would have to carry. Jeremiah's role became more important, but not in a big way that made him famous. He learned how to be patient and urgent at the same time, how to watch and act at the same time, and how to be careful and brave at the same time. The almond tree and the boiling pot stayed with him as reminders to be careful and that actions have consequences. He learned that just watching quietly, without making demands or passing judgment, could get the heart ready to understand long before words were spoken. During these years, when he was walking the line between everyday life and spiritual perception, Jeremiah's calling became a part of who he was. He shaped his understanding of the city as much as it shaped him. And through this delicate balance, he learned the subtle art of prophecy, not by shouting it out loud, but by speaking carefully and attentively, with patience, and receiving it with the quiet reverence that the night brings. As the night fell and the lanterns flickered softly, Jeremiah continued to grow into the life that was waiting for him. His vision stayed clear, his awareness grew, and his heart stayed open, ready to share truths that would last long after the noise of everyday life had died down. As Jeremiah became more aware, he began to feel the weight of responsibility more strongly. It wasn't a heavy load that made you feel hopeless. It was a quiet vigilance that needed constant attention and peace of mind. The city's winding streets and hidden corners taught him things that no teacher or classroom could. There were signs of human desire, doubt, and mistakes in every alley and behind every door. He learned to hold space for the truth, even when it wasn't welcome, by practicing and preparing to see things clearly without judging them. During this time, the words of Jeremiah began to have a more subtle power. They weren't angry screams or loud announcements from someone trying to get attention. Instead, they came out softly, like the wind blowing through olive branches at night, or the gentle sway of reeds along a calm stream. His speech was calm, clear, and patient, because he knew that real change usually happens in small, steady doses, instead of big, sudden bursts. During the day, the city was busy, but at night, it seemed to stop, making room for these quiet words to echo. People around him, even though they didn't know he was getting smarter, often showed their own problems in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Jeremiah could tell a lot from hesitant looks, brief expressions of doubt, and gestures of care or indifference. By watching carefully, he learned to read the patterns that guide how people act, as well as the unspoken agreements and tensions that lie beneath social appearances. These lessons made him more sure that prophecy wasn't just about giving warnings or instructions. It was also about showing the small truths that shape choices long before the results show up. Jeremiah found comfort in everyday things, even when things got harder. He remembered that life went on in its gentle rhythms, even though he thought there were threats all around him. When he saw a child carefully place a small stone on a balanced pile, or heard the faint laughter of neighbors across a quiet courtyard, these small things, though they may seem small, were reminders that human strength and kindness live on quietly, often without anyone noticing, but they are still very strong. These kinds of observations helped him be patient and strengthened the calm, thoughtful way he would use his prophetic voice. Jeremiah also started to realize that his calling needed both bravery and discretion. If he spoke the truth too soon or too strongly, he might lose the people he wanted to reach. But staying completely quiet could have let neglect and mistakes get worse without anyone noticing. He learned the delicate art of timing in this delicate balance: when to speak, when to watch, and when to let things happen on their own. The almond tree and the boiling pot were two of his visions that continued to guide him in this practice, reminding him to be patient and watchful in order to make wise choices. He often thought about what these symbols meant during quiet nights. The almond tree whispered how important it is to pay attention and grow steadily. The boiling pot warned of the problems that can happen when you don't pay attention. These pictures weren't just visions to be interpreted. They were also ways for Jeremiah to understand the human heart and guide him in both speaking and observing. In this way, he didn't just prepare in theory. He did it in a very practical way, by paying attention to both the ordinary and the extraordinary moments of life every day. Jeremiah's inner life grew up with the city's rhythms through these experiences. The streets, the houses, and the people all helped him understand more deeply. He learned to be clear and patient by staying still and listening. This helped him speak with authority, even when people didn't want to hear what he had to say. His calm and steady presence became a quiet force in a city that often missed what was going on below the surface. And so, as the days and nights went by, Jeremiah quietly got ready. His mind became clearer, his heart steadied, and the power of his words grew. He shaped the city as much as it shaped him, even though he didn't always know what was going on in it. And in this back and forth between seeing and thinking, the quiet, patient groundwork for the messages he would later give was laid. By the time Jeremiah was a young adult, the world around him had become more complicated. However, His own inner vision had grown into something strong and lasting. He didn't just see the city as a backdrop for life anymore. He saw it as a living, breathing organism whose heartbeat was measured by small, repeated actions instead of big events. Every time they talked, every time they had to make a choice or think about it, they saw how fragile the balance was between devotion, neglect, and the hidden effects that were building up like clouds before a storm. Jeremiah's job was to see, understand, and eventually speak, even if people didn't want to hear what he had to say or fought against it. In small ways, his relationship with the people of Jerusalem grew stronger. He saw merchants carefully haggling over prices, families going through their morning routines, and kids learning how to live their lives. These little patterns, which most people didn't notice, taught us about human desire, fear, and strength. Jeremiah knew that he had to pay attention to these details in order to speak meaningfully. Prophecy wasn't just about big visions or warnings. It was also about quietly, patiently, and carefully timing how he engaged the heart of a community. Even though he was walking down streets he knew well, he was still on the lookout for signs of unrest or imbalance. The tensions that were building in markets, councils, and homes reminded him of the boiling pot he had imagined years before. Every loud voice, every small argument, and every quick movement were all quiet signs of what might happen. These insights weren't meant to scare him. They were meant to get him ready for the careful guidance he would one day give. The almond tree kept teaching him to be patient and watchful, which was a nice balance to the city's restless pulse, which sometimes made him feel like he had to hurry. Jeremiah would stop and think about things at night, when the city slowed down and shadows stretched across narrow alleys. He was able to connect the patterns he saw with the lessons he learned in his visions because it was quiet. The quiet sounds of life, the distant laughter of children, the soft footsteps on cobblestones, and the faint wind through trees taught him that small, almost invisible details can hold a lot of meaning. These thoughts made him more sure that prophecy needed both observation and discernment, a mix of insight and patience that could handle the weight of resistance and indifference. Jeremiah's growing understanding was both useful and very personal. He had learned that to see the city's small changes, he needed to be calm, humble, and understanding. These traits would be very important when he finally spoke the truths that many people were not ready to hear. His job was not to force or confront, but to gently and persistently guide, making a space where people could think about things and come to understand them over time. As the days and nights went by, Jeremiah's inner life became a quiet anchor. His character was shaped by the delicate balance between hope and warning, observation and speech, and patience and action. He started to feel the weight of his calling in this balance, not as a burden to be resisted, but as a responsibility to nurture. The lessons he learned as a child, the quiet lessons he learned on the streets, and the visions that had guided him from the beginning, all came together to make him ready. By this time, the base of his prophetic journey was strong. Jeremiah had learned to look past what was right in front of him, to really listen, and to understand the small details of the world around him. The city, with all its beauty and flaws, had become a teacher, showing how complicated people are and how important it is to pay close attention all the time. And in this quiet, thoughtful preparation, the young prophet waited for the right moment to speak, not too quickly or forcefully, but at the right time when his words could reach hearts that were ready to listen, even if it took a while. As Jeremiah grew into the role he had always felt he had, the calls for help became more urgent, even though they started out quietly. Jerusalem's life went on as usual. but there were small signs of trouble starting to show. The leaders of the city often paid more attention to how things looked than to how they really were. They kept up rituals and ceremonies that made it seem like everything was in order, but tensions were building up behind the scenes. Jeremiah, who was very aware of even the smallest changes, started to see how these hidden forces could explode if they weren't dealt with. He wasn't aware because he was afraid. He was aware because he had been watching carefully, a skill he had honed over years of listening, thinking, and thinking again in the stillness of night. During these years, it became more and more clear what his job as a messenger was. He knew that when he spoke, his words needed to reach more than just ears. He realized that prophecy wasn't about getting people's attention by making loud statements. It was about weaving quiet understanding into everyday life and helping people see consequences that were often hidden until they happened. Like the almond tree, you had to be patient. Like the boiling pot, you couldn't let your guard down. Both of these things affected the rhythm of his teaching, telling him when to speak so that his message would hit home. Jeremiah also saw how people fought back. People often chose comfort over being aware and routine over thinking about things. Even people who were truly faithful sometimes had trouble when they had to face hard truths. But even with all of these problems, he saw times when people were open to him, small acts of kindness, brief moments of humility, and times when he was honest with himself that reminded him that hearts can change if you are patient and caring. He found the strength to keep going in these brief moments, when others turned away, but he stayed steady. The quiet of the evening became a safe place for him to bring his thoughts and visions together. He thought about what he had learned from the almond tree and the boiling pot as he walked through the dark streets. The almond tree's gentle persistence reminded him to take his time with understanding and to have faith in growth that couldn't be rushed. The boiling pot's simmering tension reminded him to be aware of dangers that aren't obvious and to think about how choices made too quickly or carelessly can have far-reaching effects. He used these symbols in his daily life to get both practical and spiritual advice. Jeremiah learned how to balance being involved during these important times. Speaking too forcefully could push people away, but staying quiet could let harm grow. Getting this balance right was a big part of his preparation. He learned that real influence often comes not from loud statements, but from being there all the time and paying attention. Every gesture, word, and pause that was thought out carefully had an impact on the environment and on those who were willing to listen. Jeremiah's inner life was fed by thinking about things and feeling for others. He saw the good in everyone, even those who didn't listen to his warnings or fought against them. This deep understanding helped him deal with hard truths with kindness, making sure that his messages, even though they were often sad, were not mean or hopeless. The city, with all its beauty, flaws, and quiet chaos, continued to shape him, teaching him lessons that no school could ever teach. Over the years, the young prophet kept a close eye on both the city and the people. He learned how to see what others missed, listen when others didn't, and act with care on purpose. He learned to be patient, watchful, and quietly understanding, which helped him get ready to speak out about the city's growing unrest. And through this constant practice, Jeremiah built the foundation for the important role he was meant to play, not through violence or show, but through being there and carefully revealing the truth. At this point, Jeremiah's connection to his calling had grown stronger, shaped not only by what he saw but also by a strong sense of duty. The city around him was full of life, but also very fragile. It was on the edge of devotion and distraction, stability and unrest. Jeremiah had learned to notice the small patterns that often went unnoticed in each street, home, and market. The little things like the hesitant glances between neighbors, the brief acts of kindness, and the whispers of worry behind closed doors, said a lot about how people in Jerusalem felt. During this time, Jeremiah started to feel alone, which is something that often happens to people who see more than others do. His finely tuned awareness let him see not only the city's physical changes, but also the moral and spiritual currents that were guiding its people. While other people were still focused on how things looked, he could feel the pride, neglect, and fear that were underneath. This quiet isolation, which was never loud or hard to deal with, made him think about how fragile prophecy is, how speaking truths that might be resisted, misunderstood, or even outright rejected. He often thought about the almond tree and the boiling pot during these times of reflection. The almond tree's steady growth reminded him that meaningful understanding takes time to develop, and that rushing can make it harder to see the depth of insight. The boiling pot, which was simmering with unseen tension, warned of consequences that were slowly building up below the surface, and urged people to be careful and pay attention. These visions helped him figure out how to deal with the city by showing him how to find the right balance between patience and urgency, reflection and action. Jeremiah also watched how leaders and elders acted, even though their outward devotion often hid small flaws. Ceremonies were carried out with great care, but sometimes justice and compassion fell short in private choices. These differences showed how flawed people are and how hard it is to lead a society that looks calm on the surface, but is really very troubled. Jeremiah's role was becoming clearer to him. He needed to speak into this mess, not with anger, but with gentle insistence and careful guidance. His words had to cut through the noise and appeal to people's consciences instead of telling them what to do. Jeremiah learned things that would shape his prophetic voice, even in the normal flow of everyday life. He remembered that hope was still alive, even when it seemed weak. When he saw kids taking care of each other, neighbors helping each other quietly, or families getting through tough times with strength. These little things were strong signs of the human spirit, showing that even when people are ignored or neglected, good things can still happen. They helped him remember that prophecy needs to be based on reality and pay attention to both the people's flaws and their quiet strengths. The nights were when he thought deeply about what he had seen and heard. The city's soft hum helped him do this. While he was walking through the dark streets, he saw patterns that people usually miss during the day. For example, the subtle tension in conversations, the careful movements of people who were scared or unsure, and the gestures of care that spoke louder than words. These nighttime thoughts made me more sure that understanding requires paying attention to both what is said and what is not said, what is seen and what is not seen. Insight grows slowly, through patience and constant observation. At this point in his journey, Jeremiah's understanding of the city grew along with his inner life. He learned to be more patient, empathetic, and discerning. He learned that being quiet and watching was just as important as speaking up. The almond tree and the pot of boiling water kept showing him the way. They were signs of constant awareness and the need to be alert. He got ready for the heavy messages he would one day deliver by carefully watching and thinking about them. These messages would challenge comfort, confront complacency, and bring to light truths that many people wanted to avoid. So, the young prophet kept getting ready quietly. He walked the streets of Jerusalem with care and awareness, paying attention to its rhythms and getting his heart ready for the words he would one day have to say. His ties to the city and the hidden forces that ran through it grew stronger, setting the stage for the deep journey that lay ahead. As Jeremiah got older, The quiet patterns he had noticed for years started to mean more to him. The city's routines, which used to be comforting because they were so predictable, now showed themselves to be fragile structures that could be easily broken by quick decisions or leaders whose hearts had grown distant from justice. Jeremiah could see the effects of neglect starting to show in small ways. A market dispute that got out of hand, a family's unspoken problems that turned into anger, and neighbors' trust slowly fading. In each of these cases, it was a reminder that even small actions can have big effects if they aren't stopped. He had become very aware of how hard it is to find the right balance between watching and acting. Jeremiah knew that just seeing wasn't enough. He had to eventually talk about what he saw, but he had to be careful about when and how he said it. If you talk too soon or too harshly, you might get rejected. If you stay quiet, you might let harm happen without anyone noticing. He learned the quiet art of discernment in this tension. He learned to wait for times when people were ready to understand and when their hearts might be open, even if only a little, to what needed to be heard. The almond tree and the boiling pot were always there in his thoughts. The almond tree taught him to be patient and watchful, which reminded him that even small changes can have big effects over time. The boiling pot, which was simmering with a hint of tension, warned him of consequences that others didn't see coming and pushed him to realize how important it is to think ahead. These symbols were no longer just ideas. They were real things that helped him understand the moral and social currents in the city and how he would talk to its people in the future. Jeremiah also began to understand more and more how alone true insight can make you feel. Few people could see the complicated webs of cause and effect that he saw, and even fewer could see the quiet lessons that life taught them every day. Some people thought he was being too careful or paying too much attention to detail, but he knew that these small things were the building blocks of good advice. Watching, thinking, and staying calm became more than just a habit. They became a discipline that got him ready for the bigger job of sending messages that couldn't be ignored. Jeremiah found hope in the everyday life of the city. Small acts of kindness, moments of humility, and short bursts of courage showed that people could still respond to the truth, even when they were being ignored or corrupted. These glimpses of resilience helped him understand that prophecy wasn't just about warning people about what would happen. It was also about helping people see the possibility of change and reflection. He learned that guidance must be as gentle as it is firm, as patient as it is persistent. By making room for both caution and hope, Jerusalem's nights became a place to think. Jeremiah took in the rhythms of life that were easy to miss during the day as he walked under the dim light of lanterns and listened to the soft echo of footsteps on stone streets. The silence showed patterns of fear, care, ambition, and self-control. By paying attention to these small details, he got a better sense of the city's pulse and learned to see human behavior not as separate actions, but as part of a larger flow of choices, reactions, and consequences. Jeremiah's preparation for his prophetic journey changed from an internal exercise to a way of life because of these formative experiences. His awareness, patience, and ability to tell the difference between things changed how he interacted with the world, letting him deal with the complicated relationship between seeing and doing. He fully integrated the lessons of the almond tree and the boiling pot into his daily life. They kept him grounded in the steady rhythm of watchfulness, while also reminding him of the urgency of the currents around him. And so, in the quiet of both day and night, Jeremiah's knowledge of people, the city, and the hidden forces that shape events kept getting deeper. He stayed calm and watched, listened carefully, and was always there in Jerusalem, getting ready for the times when his words would carry the weight of truth that few were ready to hear. As time went on, Jeremiah learned more about how people work and how fear, pride, and desire affected how the city acted. He saw that even when people were outwardly devoted, their hearts often wandered because they were focused on their own comfort or gain. The merchants in the market, the teachers in the schools, and the families in their homes all had hidden tensions and worries that made up the invisible fabric of life in Jerusalem. He quietly built his understanding on these observations, which helped him see patterns that others missed. The almond tree and the boiling pot kept telling him what to do during these times. The almond tree, which grew slowly and kept an eye on him, reminded him that insight takes time to develop and is often not noticed until its effects are fully felt. The boiling pot, which was simmering with unseen effects, warned him of what happens when people don't pay attention or do the wrong thing. Jeremiah learned how to find the right balance between being patient and being urgent by keeping both symbols in mind. He learned how to act or speak at the right time, taking into account both the readiness of others and the demands of truth. His thoughts went beyond just seeing things to understanding how influence works. Jeremiah knew that words alone couldn't change people's hearts. Timing, perception, and how open people were to them were just as important. To tell the truth, he needed to be sensitive, gently persistent, and able to connect what he said to the experiences of the people he was talking to. He developed a way of talking that was both quiet and interesting, and it could reach even those who were not interested or were busy. Jeremiah also learned that small, unnoticed actions can have lasting effects. A neighbor quietly helping the sick, a teacher patiently helping students, and a family taking care of each other in private were all signs of hope and strength. They showed that even in a society where looks often matter more than what people say, the seeds of change and thought were still alive. Jeremiah's belief that prophecy must be based on real life, paying attention to both the problems and the quiet strengths that are always there, grew stronger as he watched these events unfold. The city's nights became a safe place for him to go back to over and over again. As he walked through the dark streets, he would listen to the soft sounds of everyday life, the quiet conversations, the distant laughter of kids, and the soft sighs that the evening breeze carried. Most people would have missed these sounds, but they said a lot about the people around him. During these hours, Jeremiah's patience and attention grew, letting him see not only what was happening, but also what was going on behind the scenes of speech and action. Sometimes isolation was hard, but it also taught me things. Not many people could see how deep his understanding was, and even fewer could appreciate how carefully he paid attention to the world around him. But Jeremiah used this time alone to improve his ability to observe, think, and be ready. The almond tree and boiling pot were no longer just distant symbols. They were now part of how he saw life. They changed the way he lived his days and nights and got him ready for the bigger responsibilities that were coming. Jeremiah's understanding of how choice and consequence are connected grew through these experiences. He started to see patterns that hinted at bigger things to come. He realized that even small acts of neglect or injustice could have big effects. His role, though quiet and often unnoticed, became very important. He was getting ready to speak, not just as a warning, but also as a guide who could tell the truth in ways that would make people think, awaken their minds, and eventually change their lives. And so, as life went on at a slow pace, Jeremiah developed the steady patience, careful observation, and deep empathy that would define his prophetic journey. Every street, every gesture, and every quiet moment were all part of the subtle training that helped him carry heavy truths with gentle clarity. This made sure that when the time came, people would listen to his words with the quiet respect they deserved. By this time, Jeremiah had become a young man who was very aware of the city around him and very quiet. He knew that life in Jerusalem was complicated. It wasn't just what people did and said. It was also the small decisions they made, the hidden motives they had, and the quiet stirrings of their consciences. He could see that the city was alive in ways that other people couldn't. There was a living web of relationships, choices, and consequences that slowly, sometimes without anyone noticing, played out beneath the surface of everyday life. He started to see patterns that other people missed or ignored. There were traders arguing over prices, families dealing with small problems, and leaders keeping ceremonial order while ignoring justice. All of these were parts of the city's complicated tapestry. Jeremiah's growing understanding showed him how small actions, whether good or bad, could add up to things that changed the lives of many people. Like the pot that was simmering in his vision, tensions and mistakes that weren't talked about could build up quietly and be ready to spill over if no one was paying attention. The almond tree kept teaching me to be patient and pay close attention. Jeremiah thought about how growth, whether in trees, people, or society, needs constant care, and how you can't rush true understanding. He saw similarities between his life and the lives of the people around him. Small choices, unnoticed virtues, and quiet mistakes were changing the community in ways that would only become clear over time. This knowledge helped him in his interactions, so he could speak and act with both care and accuracy. Jeremiah also saw how fear or comfort could easily change people's hearts. People often held on to routine, ritual, or appearances, and didn't think about things more deeply, even when they should have. But he also found times when people were open to new ideas, even if only for a short time, when guidance could take hold. Even though these moments were small, they had a big impact on him. They made him believe that prophecy needed more than words. It needed attunement, timing, and the ability to help people understand in a gentle, patient way. He saw the quiet strength of kindness and resilience. Even as he worked on these skills, people in the city showed a hidden strength by caring for their neighbors without expecting anything in return. Families staying together through tough times, and teachers patiently guiding their students. Jeremiah knew that these little bits of goodness were important parts of Jerusalem's life. They agreed with him that prophecy must not only point out flaws but also the potential for good, since these small acts could lead to lasting change. He still found peace at night. As he walked through the dimly lit streets, he listened to the soft sounds of life, the rustling of leaves, the quiet chatter of homes far away, and the careful steps of people who were either moving with purpose or hesitation. These nighttime observations improved his ability to see patterns that were hidden during the day. In this quiet, he practiced the art of discernment, learning to tell the difference between short-term distractions and long-term patterns that would eventually determine the city's fate. Jeremiah's understanding of his own calling became stronger as he became more aware of it. He understood that prophecy wasn't just about giving warnings or instructions. It was also about developing insight, patience, and empathy so that when words were spoken, they would ring true and be in line with one's conscience. The almond tree and the boiling pot were no longer just visions. They became part of how he lived his life and helped him get ready for the difficult messages he would one day have to give. And so, Jeremiah kept getting ready in secret, walking through the city with steady focus, listening to its rhythms, and picking up on the small patterns that other people missed. Every observation, every thought, and every meeting became part of the foundation for the words he would one day say. These words would be important, draw attention, and touch the hearts of those who were ready to hear them. As Jeremiah got older, the weight of his awareness grew. It wasn't a burden, but a quiet duty that shaped every moment of his life. The city around him went about its business as usual. Markets opened at dawn, kids played in narrow alleys, and families cooked meals. But beneath the surface, there were currents that only he seemed to be able to see. There were small signs of imbalance and subtle tensions that hinted at things that would happen in the future. And even though many people ignored these signs, Jeremiah paid close attention to them, like a quiet pulse beneath the city's calm surface. He saw how easily people's habits could hide deeper truths. A leader's outward devotion might hide decisions made out of ambition or neglect. Families could act polite while hiding their true feelings. Friends could say nice things while not really caring. He saw each of these layers of human behavior, not with judgment, but with a measured understanding that life is complicated and that the seeds of both success and failure are often right in front of us. The quiet things he saw and heard during these years helped him learn how to speak with authority when the time came, making sure that his messages were based on real life instead of ideas. Jeremiah's nightly walks were still an important part of his practice. The dimly lit streets, with only flickering lanterns to light them, were a good place to think and pay attention. The city's quiet sounds, the soft thud of footsteps, the quiet conversations behind closed doors, and the distant laughter of children became lessons in their own right. He learned to read the small changes in tone, hesitation, and movement, and he found that every little thing could say something about how people felt and what was happening. This careful patience helped him see patterns that others might have missed, making him ready to guide and warn with accuracy. The almond tree and the boiling pot kept teaching him things that changed how he thought. The almond tree stood for constant watchfulness, reminding him that paying close attention over time leads to growth and understanding. The boiling pot, which had hidden consequences, reminded him that actions and choices that aren't checked can build up slowly until they have a clear effect. Jeremiah took these lessons to heart, which changed how he saw things and when he spoke. He learned that prophecy needed to be done in a careful way, with insight but not impatience, with guidance but not force, and with warnings but not fear-mongering. Jeremiah kept an eye on the small acts of kindness around him, even as he got ready for his bigger role. People helping their neighbors without being thanked, families taking care of the weak, and teachers patiently guiding children. All of these small acts of goodness made me believe that even when people are busy or forgetful, they can still think about and change their behavior. Jeremiah saw the quiet strength of resilience in these actions. They reminded him that guidance should be given in a way that recognizes and supports this natural ability. It became more and more important to find the right balance between being patient and being urgent. Jeremiah knew that talking too soon could push people away, but staying quiet could let harm happen without anyone noticing. He got ready to act or speak at the right time by paying close attention and thinking deeply. His growing understanding helped him see not only the obvious effects, but also the moral and social currents that were shaping the city's future. Jeremiah developed a deep understanding of the people he saw over the years. He knew what they were afraid of, what they wanted, and why they were hesitant. He also knew that prophecy wasn't just about showing what would happen, but also about helping people understand. His presence became a steady, quiet force that let him watch, think, and get ready for the times when his words would mean something. And so, as the days and nights went by in a calm rhythm, Jeremiah kept getting ready in silence. Every little thing he noticed, thought about, and paid attention to became part of the foundation for the messages he would one day give. These messages were meant to wake people up, help them make decisions, and show them truths that couldn't be ignored. As Jeremiah got older, he became more aware of the delicate balance between hope and warning that defined his calling. Jerusalem's busy markets, crowded streets, and hidden courtyards all kept going as usual, but he could feel the deeper currents beneath this familiar surface. During the quiet times between tasks, he saw the small interactions that showed the heart of the city, the unspoken worries of leaders, the restrained anger of families, and the quiet bravery of people who did the right thing, even when no one was looking. Each of these brief looks helped him understand people and the complicated web of decisions that made up his life. Jeremiah got better at knowing when to do things. He had learned over the years that if you talk too soon, people might ignore you, dismiss you, or even fight back. If you talk too late, on the other hand, things might get worse without you knowing. The almond tree and the boiling pot were still quiet teachers. The almond tree taught him how important it was to pay attention and be patient, and the boiling pot warned him about the hidden pressures that could come out of nowhere. He understood through these symbols that prophecy needed more than just insight. It needed a careful approach that took into account how urgent the message was and how ready the listener was to hear it. He also started to see the small ways that people are strong and weak. Some people, even though they were comfortable or used to doing things a certain way, showed moments of awareness that showed they could think about things and change. Others, who were stuck in patterns of neglect or pride, showed how slowly the consequences were building up and might one day be too much for them to handle. Jeremiah's job, as he came to understand it more and more, was to shed light on these truths, not to shame or scare people, but to make them aware and lead them to think. The quiet of night was still an important part of his daily routine. He walked the streets in the dim light of lamps, listening to the soft hum of life around him, the rustling of leaves in courtyards, the distant footsteps of travelers, and the soft murmur of conversations through partially open doors. These sounds, which were almost inaudible to others, gave him a glimpse into the city's moral and emotional currents. Jeremiah learned more about how small actions, both kind and careless, affected the bigger picture of the community by paying close attention to these details. He saw the constant struggle between growth and decay, care and neglect, even when things seemed calm. Families might take care of each other in secret while ignoring bigger duties. Leaders might keep up with ceremonial devotion while ignoring justice and mercy. These differences showed how complicated human life is, and Jeremiah learned that good advice needs to pay attention to these layers. His job was not only to notice these patterns, but also to react to them with care, understanding, and accuracy. Jeremiah became very responsible by thinking about things and watching them. His insight was no longer just something he could do on his own. It was a guiding force that changed how he interacted with the city and its people. He learned that prophecy meant listening carefully, being quiet, and knowing how people's hearts really were, not how they looked. By developing these traits, he got ready to send messages that were both honest and kind, and that could reach people who were willing to listen even though they were busy or had other problems. During this time, the basis of his prophetic voice became stronger. He was a steady presence who could see both the obvious and hidden forces that were shaping the world around him. He combined patience, observation, and empathy. He was fully aware of the almond tree and the boiling pot every day. They were symbols that helped him understand timing, consequence, and the subtle art of influence. And so, Jeremiah's journey went on, filled with quiet watchfulness and deep thought. Every street, every conversation, and every moment of insight helped him get ready for the messages he would one day give. These messages were meant to wake people up, reveal hidden truths, and lead the city through the unseen currents that shaped its future. At this point, Jeremiah had a deep understanding of the city and its people, including both obvious and hidden forces. The streets of Jerusalem were no longer just places to walk. They were part of a living web of human experience. Every interaction, no matter how small, felt important. A quick look between neighbors, a quiet word between friends, or a small act of kindness or neglect could have effects that few people noticed. Jeremiah's sensitive perception helped him see these ripples, feel the tensions building under the city's surface, and understand how they might one day show up. The lessons he learned from the almond tree and the boiling pot stayed with him. The almond tree's slow, steady growth reminded him that it takes time to understand things, and that in a world that is hard to understand, you need to pay close attention to find the truth. The pot that was boiling but not making noise was a metaphor for the unseen pressures that could suddenly explode and have effects that were much bigger than what was obvious. Jeremiah took these lessons with him as he walked around the city. He learned how to balance being alert with being patient, being in a hurry with thinking things through, and being careful with being kind. He also started to get how complicated it is for people to respond. Some people could respond to truth or warning with openness and thoughtfulness, while others resisted or ignored it out of fear, pride, or a desire to stay comfortable. Jeremiah learned to expect these different reactions because he knew that how well his words worked would depend on both what he said and how ready the listener was. As important as insight was, patience became just as important. You can't force someone to understand. It takes time and care. Jeremiah's quiet, thoughtful nights continued to be a safe place to watch. As he walked through the dark streets, he heard the soft, layered sounds of life around him. The shuffle of feet on stone, the distant murmur of voices behind closed doors, and the whisper of wind through trees and courtyards. Every sound gave us a glimpse into how people acted, what they feared, what they hoped for, and how they felt. In this way, the city itself became a teacher, teaching people to be patient, watchful, and careful when looking at other people's hearts. Jeremiah kept an eye on the small acts of kindness that happened around him even as he worked on these skills. A neighbor's quiet support for the elderly, a family's commitment to each other during tough times, and a teacher's patient guidance. These small acts showed that people can still grow morally, reflect, and empathize. Jeremiah understood that prophecy must encompass both imperfections and strengths, articulating into existence with an awareness of the potential for transformation and the resilience that frequently endures unnoticed. He learned to find a careful balance between being aware and taking action through these experiences. He couldn't just watch. He had to know when and how to talk, when to wait, and when to lead. His ability to think about the moral currents of the city grew stronger with every choice he made, everything he saw, and every time he thought about it. He learned that to really have an effect on people, you need to be subtle, patient, and have a lot of respect for how complicated life is. Jeremiah's awareness became both a duty and a gift. As he continued on this journey, he walked through the city quietly, paying attention to the complex rhythms of life and the unseen forces that shaped it. Every lesson, every observation, And every thought he had about the almond tree and the boiling pot made him more ready to deliver the messages he would eventually give. These messages wouldn't be rushed or forced, but they would be true and reach hearts that were open to their quiet insistence. The young prophet kept walking around Jerusalem, watching, thinking, and developing the patience, empathy, and discernment that would define his role. Every little piece of information and every quiet observation brought him closer to the day when his words would guide, warn, and wake up the hearts of those around him, changing the city's future in ways that were both big and small. Jeremiah's understanding of the city's subtle rhythms grew even stronger over time. He realized that life in Jerusalem was made up of more than just what people could see, like the busy markets, the daily routines of families, and the ceremonial rituals. It was also made up of a lot of decisions and motives that people didn't see that quietly changed the course of events. He could see the tensions that lay beneath polite facades, neighbors who were wary of each other, leaders who were weighed down by fear or ambition, and families who were having a hard time but not saying anything. Jeremiah had learned to see these small, often ignored details as part of a complex web of cause and effect. The almond tree and the boiling pot, which he had seen in his dreams many times before, still led him. The almond tree made him think that growth, whether it's in understanding, virtue, or community, happens slowly and with patience. The pot on the stove, which was quietly simmering, warned him about the hidden pressures and tensions that could come out of nowhere. These lessons changed how he saw the world and how he talked to people. They taught him to be subtle, to know when to speak, and to be careful with how he spoke to others. Jeremiah became more aware of how comfort, routine, and pride could make people not see the truth. Many were happy to follow appearances, keeping up with their daily routines and rituals, while ignoring the deeper truths that shaped their lives. But he also saw times when people were aware and caring, when they took a moment to think or do something with real care. These times gave him hope that things could change and that people could respond to the truth if they were patient and persistent. The stillness of night was still a safe place for him to think. He walked through streets that weren't very well lit and listened to the soft sounds of life. The distant laughter of kids, the whispered conversations of neighbors, and the leaves moving in the wind. Every sound had a meaning, showing tensions, hopes, and the complex web of how people interact with each other. During these hours, Jeremiah got better at reading people's behavior, feeling both the visible and invisible forces at work, and figuring out how his words might later touch hearts that were open to them. He also saw how virtue quietly persisted in the face of the city's problems. Simple things, like a family taking care of a sick person, a neighbor helping without being asked, or a teacher patiently guiding a student, showed strength and kindness that often went unrecognized. Jeremiah knew that prophecy had to take this duality into account, the flaws that needed to be fixed, and the good traits that needed to be strengthened. To help people think about things, you had to be able to see both sides of the issue, so that warnings didn't overshadow hope, and instructions didn't ignore the possibility of change. It became more and more clear what the right balance was between watching and doing. Jeremiah understood that insight alone was inadequate. He needed to discern the appropriate moments to articulate and the suitable manner to communicate messages. Each choice needed discernment, empathy, and an understanding of human nature, because the truth of the guidance depended as much on when and how it was given as on the truth itself. He had fully absorbed the lessons of the almond tree and the boiling pot, which affected everything he thought, and did. Jeremiah's role as an observer and budding guide grew through this patient attention. He was no longer just a witness to the city's rhythms. He was now a part of its moral and spiritual currents, and could tell when intervention would have the most impact. His calm presence, careful watching, and developed empathy made him ready to speak with authority, but always with care and subtlety. As the days and nights went by, Jeremiah kept getting ready slowly and carefully. Every little thing he saw and every thought he had brought him closer to the moment when his voice would carry the weight of truth, measured, gentle, and undeniable, waking up hearts and shedding light on the hidden forces that shape the lives of those around him. At this point, Jeremiah had a very good grasp of how people act and how things work in Jerusalem. He could read the city like a living book. Every look, gesture, and small interaction told a story that was hidden beneath the surface. For him, markets, homes, and streets that seemed normal to most were actually very complicated. Jeremiah had learned to see the complicated web of life that included small arguments, unnoticed acts of kindness, and subtle tensions. Each layer had effects that often took a long time to show up. Just like the pot that was simmering in his dreams, the effects were only seen at the right time. The almond tree, always a quiet guide, reminded him that to really understand something, you have to be patient and pay attention. Jeremiah understood that he couldn't rush growth, whether it was in knowledge, virtue, or community. Each step happens at its own time. The boiling pot made another point. If you ignore unseen pressures, they will build up quietly until they reach a point where you have to deal with them. These lessons changed the way he saw things and helped him develop a new understanding of how to lead others with care, sensitivity, and accuracy without pushing or overwhelming them. He realized more and more how fragile trust is and how small mistakes can quickly lead to bigger problems. Families that didn't talk to each other, leaders who only cared about themselves, and neighbors who didn't show kindness, all added to tensions that affected the whole community, often without realizing it. Jeremiah's ability to see these dynamics helped him predict what would happen and think about how guidance could help, which made him feel more responsible to speak clearly and with compassion. Jeremiah's nights were still very important for thinking. As he walked through the dark streets, he listened to the quiet sounds of the city, the soft footsteps of someone walking late, the soft conversations behind closed doors, and the gentle rustle of leaves in hidden courtyards. These sounds, which were quiet but meaningful, helped us understand how people act and the emotions that often drive them. In this quiet time, he improved his ability to tell the difference between actions, words, and gestures that could help or hurt him, and how he could later share his thoughts with others to make them think. Jeremiah found that hope was always there when he saw the small but important acts of virtue around him. A neighbor quietly helping the sick, a family caring for someone without getting credit, and a teacher patiently guiding students. These are all examples of good deeds that people often forget about. They show that people can be good even when they are ignored or do something wrong. Jeremiah knew that prophecy had to look at both good and bad things, because real guidance has to inspire change while also recognizing the quiet strength that is already there. He learned how insight and action work together in a delicate way by paying close attention to these things. Awareness was important, but the timing and delivery of a message were what made it effective. If you speak too soon, you might get pushback. If you stay quiet, you might let harm grow. Jeremiah learned how to tell when the right time was by being patient and understanding. This would make his advice both respected and followed. Jeremiah's job as an observer, learner, and guide became clearer with each passing day and night. His quiet watchfulness, empathy, and ability to see things clearly were turning him into a person who could speak truths that would make people think and be aware. The almond tree and boiling pot, which had once been far-off images, had become symbols inside him that helped him understand cause and effect, timing, and patience. They got him ready for the important messages that would shape his prophetic journey. At this point, Jeremiah had grown into a young man who was very aware of both the obvious and hidden currents of life in Jerusalem. The streets, markets, and homes that most people thought were normal were full of little things that were important to him. A small fight in a market could be a sign of bigger problems to come, and a quiet talk between neighbors could show tensions that could quietly change whole neighborhoods. Jeremiah had learned to read every small gesture, look, or word as part of a complex pattern, much like how one might notice the small changes in a river before a storm. The almond tree and the boiling pot, which had once been symbols of far-off visions, were now lessons that he had learned and that affected how he saw everything. The almond tree made him think of being patient and watchful. He knew that growth and understanding can't be rushed, and that paying close attention over time often leads to the deepest insight. The boiling pot, which was simmering with unseen pressures, warned that consequences were building up quietly and could suddenly explode if they were not taken care of. Jeremiah learned to live with both of these ideas in mind, being calm and ready to act when necessary. He started to notice the weak links that held people together more and more. Pride, fear, or neglect could easily break trust. Leaders' choices, whether they were made on purpose or by accident, had effects on whole families and neighborhoods. Jeremiah was able to see these connections because he was very observant. He could see where tensions might rise and where guidance could keep people safe. He became more responsible because he realized that prophecy wasn't just about telling the truth. It was also about timing, empathy, and carefully shaping people's awareness. Jeremiah still found insight and reflection in the quiet, but alive, nights of the city. He walked through quiet streets, lit only by lanterns, and picked up on small signs of life. The sound of fabric rustling as someone carefully moved through an alley, the sound of voices behind closed doors, and the sound of children's laughter carried across rooftops. He learned about the hidden flows of emotion and intention in the city from each of these sounds. He got better at figuring out how people act by paying attention to them and noticing patterns that might not have been obvious before. Jeremiah also saw how resilience and goodness quietly stayed strong in the face of the city's problems. Families taking care of each other in secret, neighbors helping the weak without being thanked, and teachers patiently caring for children. These small, often unnoticed acts showed how strong human hearts are. Jeremiah knew that any message he would one day give would have to include both good and bad things, as well as caution and encouragement, and correction and recognition of the possibility of change. Jeremiah improved the balance between being patient and stepping in by watching all the time. He needed more than just insight. He needed to know exactly when to speak, how to say it in a way that would resonate, and which hearts were most open to the truth. He began to understand what it meant to lead others without pushing them by learning about timing, empathy, and subtlety. Jeremiah's awareness and understanding kept getting deeper as he went about his daily life and thought about things at night. Every observation and thought helped him slowly develop his prophetic voice. This voice could wake people up and reveal hidden truths, but it was always tempered with patience, empathy, and careful judgment. Jeremiah's view of Jerusalem changed more and more over the years. he had learned to look past the surface of things like polite gestures, rituals, and everyday activities and see the deeper patterns of human behavior. Even small things like not saying a word, breaking a promise, or doing something nice for someone else could have big effects on the community that few people saw. Jeremiah, who was aware of these small patterns, started to see the city itself as a living thing whose health depended on the choices, intentions, and hearts of its people. The almond tree stayed a quiet guide in his thoughts. The way it grew slowly and steadily reminded him that real understanding and real change take time to happen. Wisdom doesn't come from being forced. It grows over time with careful observation and experience. The pot that was boiling quietly added to the idea that consequences often form without being seen before they become clear. Jeremiah knew that these signs weren't just visions. They were lessons on how to live, how to pay attention, and how to get ready for the heavy messages he would one day have to deliver. He started to see how fear, desire, and conscience worked together in the people around him. Leaders who kept their authority on the outside sometimes made decisions based more on their own goals than on what was right. Instead of thinking about it, families and neighbors did things out of habit, comfort, or pride. But even in these patterns, there were times when things became clear and people responded. Small gestures, kind words, and acts of care showed that there was always a chance for virtue and change. These small acts of kindness, even though they were often quiet, became very important to Jeremiah. They reminded him that hearts could be reached with patience and understanding. The quiet of night was still a safe place. Jeremiah walked the streets in the dark, listening to sounds that other people might not have noticed, like the soft closing of a door, a quiet conversation in a courtyard, or the wind whispering over rooftops. These details showed him the rhythms and hidden patterns of human life, giving him clues about people's intentions, fears, and times of bravery. He learned over time how to tell which patterns needed his attention, which decisions could be influenced, and when a word or gesture would have the biggest effect. He also learned to notice the small but powerful acts of kindness and strength that happened all over the city. A neighbor helping someone in need, a family quietly raising their kids, and a teacher patiently teaching students are all examples of how goodness never goes away. Jeremiah understood that prophecy should not only warn and teach, but also honor these threads of virtue, encouraging hope and thoughtfulness, along with caution. Every time Jeremiah saw something, he learned more about timing, patience, and empathy. Just having insight wasn't enough. It had to be combined with the ability to tell when and how to act. If you talk too soon, you could push people away, and if you wait too long, you could let harm grow without anyone noticing. In his preparation, he made sure to find the right balance between observation and action. This way, when he finally delivered his messages, they would have a deep impact and open people's hearts to new ideas. Jeremiah's role as a guide and observer became stronger through this quiet cultivation of attention, understanding, and empathy. He walked through the streets of Jerusalem with a keen eye, noticing what was hidden, figuring out patterns, and getting ready to speak with clarity, patience, and kindness. Every day and night helped shape his prophetic voice, which would one day reveal truths, help people make decisions, and wake up hearts to the unseen forces that shape their lives. As Jeremiah grew wiser and more mature, he began to see how people, families, and the community as a whole were all connected in complex ways. Most people thought life in Jerusalem was normal, but to him it was a complicated web of cause and effect. The daily lives of merchants, teachers, and families had small effects that changed the city in ways that weren't always obvious. Over time, a single careless choice, an unspoken word, or a small act of injustice could change the lives of many people. Jeremiah was very aware, so he could see these ripples and understand how important it was to find the right balance between action and outcome. The almond tree was always a place to think. He remembered that understanding and change take time as he watched it grow. The tree's quiet strength was like how slowly but surely insight grows in people's hearts. The boiling pot, which is still a symbol of hidden pressures, showed that consequences often build up quietly and can come out of nowhere if they are not taken care of. These symbols helped Jeremiah understand the subtle layers of life around him by showing him when to watch, when to act, and how to balance being in a hurry with being patient. Jeremiah saw more and more that people have two sides: the conflict between good and bad, hope and neglect. Leaders, even though they seemed devoted, sometimes did things out of fear or self-interest. Families could look like they were getting along when they were actually fighting. But even with all of this going on, there were still signs of strength and goodness. A small act of kindness, a quiet show of understanding, or an unacknowledged moment of honesty showed that people could think about their actions and change. Jeremiah knew that prophecy had to take this balance into account, pointing out flaws while not ignoring the hidden potential for good that could be nurtured over time. The nights in the city were still a safe place for him to make observations. Jeremiah would walk the streets at night, listening carefully to the quiet sounds around him. The soft shuffle of feet, the quiet chatter of people, the distant call of a watchman on duty, or the faint laughter of kids. Each of these details gave him a better understanding of the city's moral and emotional landscape by revealing hidden feelings, intentions, and tensions. He learned to predict outcomes and figure out when advice would be most helpful over time. He still thought that small acts of virtue were very important. People helping each other quietly, families keeping the peace and taking care of each other, and teachers patiently teaching their students. These small acts of kindness were all signs of hope and strength that would last. Jeremiah knew that these secret acts of kindness were just as important to the city's life as the more obvious problems and wrongs. It was important for him to understand both the good and bad things that happen in people's lives in order to get ready to be a messenger. Jeremiah improved how he practiced patience and discernment by thinking about them all the time. It wasn't enough to just have insight. It was also important to know when and how to speak. Words spoken too soon might be rejected, and silence could let harm grow without being stopped. The relationship between observation and timing became very important to his growing prophetic wisdom. It taught him that paying close attention and giving subtle guidance could make people think and bring about change without using force. Jeremiah's perception, empathy, and understanding grew deeper as the days and nights went by. Every observation, thought, and experience became a building block for his future messages, a calm, measured voice that could lead, warn, and wake up hearts. The lessons of the almond tree and the boiling pot had become fully realized principles that shaped his patience, insight, and ability to tell right from wrong as he moved steadily toward the duties that awaited him. Jeremiah's understanding of Jerusalem grew, and he began to see not only how people acted, but also how different groups of people affected each other in small ways throughout the city. He saw how little things that most people don't notice can have big effects. A rude word from a merchant could cause problems in a market, while a neighbor's secret act of kindness could spread goodwill. He was fascinated by these quiet, almost invisible forces because they showed him that human life is rarely isolated. Every choice, gesture, and thought could have an effect on the future in ways that often took months or years to become clear. The almond tree still stood for the quiet strength that is needed for wisdom. Its slow growth reminded him that insight can't be rushed, and that understanding, whether it's about human nature or God's plan, takes time to develop. The boiling pot, which was still simmering out of sight, made it clear how important it is to be alert and plan ahead. Jeremiah understood that consequences often happen without anyone noticing, and if you don't notice them, things could happen that have terrible effects. These signs helped him make sense of what he saw, showing him how to find the right balance between being patient and being in a hurry, thinking and acting. He also became more aware of the small changes in morality and conscience. A lot of people stuck to their routines and how things looked, ignoring their inner conflicts or not thinking about them. Sometimes, leaders who were very focused on ceremony or tradition didn't meet the deeper needs of their communities. But even in the face of neglect and pride, he saw signs of honesty and compassion. A child quietly helping a parent, a neighbor helping without being asked, or a teacher patiently helping their students understand. These all showed that virtue can last. Jeremiah knew that prophecy had to include both failure and goodness, telling the truth while also raising awareness and hope. The nights became a safe place to watch and think. He walked down dark streets and listened to the soft sounds of the city, the distant sound of feet on stone, a quiet conversation behind a closed door, and the gentle rustling of trees in the wind. Every sound, even the quietest ones, gave him a glimpse into the hearts of people. He learned to see patterns of tension, care, fear, and courage, which helped him get better at seeing not just what people were doing, but also the hidden forces that drove them. Jeremiah also thought about how small acts can always bring hope. He realized that goodness often stays around, even when people are busy or having a hard time. The strength of the human spirit was shown by families helping each other, neighbors being kind without being asked, and people being patient. He understood that real guidance must recognize this balance, promoting good behavior as well as punishing bad behavior. He understood that prophecy is not just about warning people. It is also about waking them up, making them think, and showing them how to be morally clear. Jeremiah developed a keen sense of timing and judgment over the years by watching carefully. He needed to know when, how, and to whom to speak in order to change things. Insight alone couldn't do that. If you send a message too soon, it might be ignored. If you wait too long, the harm could get worse. He got ready to talk in ways that would really touch people's hearts by mixing patience, empathy, and a subtle understanding. Jeremiah's life became a cycle of quiet attention, thought, and planning. Every little sound, gesture, and observation added to the bass of his prophetic voice. He moved steadily toward the day when his words would be clear, heavy, and resonant, bringing to light the hidden currents of Jerusalem and waking people up to truths they could no longer ignore. At this point, Jeremiah had a very deep understanding of Jerusalem. He didn't just see the city as a bunch of streets and buildings. He saw it as a living, breathing thing that was shaped by millions of small choices, feelings, and interactions. Every word spoken, every act of care or neglect, and every look exchanged had an effect on the community that often went unnoticed for months or even years. Jeremiah's special awareness let him see these ripples, which showed him the quiet ways that good and bad things affected the lives of the people around him. The almond tree's lessons stayed with him, reminding him that it takes time and careful attention to grow and learn. Wisdom grows slowly and can't be rushed. It needs to be observed and thought about regularly. The boiling pot, which was still simmering out of sight, made him think of the pressures that build up quietly until they can't be ignored. These lessons had become so ingrained in him that they changed how he thought, acted, and spoke in the future. He learned how to be both careful and patient, how to be both understanding and empathetic, and how to be both insightful and careful with his timing. Jeremiah was aware of the city's moral problems. He knew that people often had to choose between doing the right thing and giving up, between hope and being too comfortable. Leaders might do religious rituals while ignoring wrongs, and families might keep up appearances while hiding problems. But even in these bad times, Jeremiah saw signs of strength and goodness. A neighbor quietly helping the needy, a teacher patiently guiding children, or a family supporting one another through hard times. All of these things showed that moral growth is always possible. Jeremiah knew that prophecy had to talk about both good and bad things, and give advice that made people more aware instead of making them feel scared or ashamed. The quiet of night was still an important part of his practice. He walked under dim lantern light and listened to the soft sounds around him, the distant footsteps of a traveler, the soft murmur of voices behind closed doors, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. These details gave us a better understanding of people's intentions, feelings, and behavior patterns that we couldn't see during the day. Jeremiah learned how to read these signs, taking his time and being careful with them, and using them to shape his understanding of the city's moral and spiritual climate. He also learned a lot about how small acts of kindness can affect the health of the whole community. Small acts of kindness, like helping a neighbor, taking care of a child, or being kind without being noticed, created invisible threads of hope and strength. Jeremiah understood that prophecy should respect these threads as much as it should call out wrongdoings, because they showed the possibility of change and the strength of good even when things are hard. Jeremiah improved his sense of timing and judgment by thinking about these things. It wasn't enough for him to just know things. He also needed to know when his words would have an effect, when advice would be welcome, and when it would be better to stay silent. Patience and empathy became important parts of his growing wisdom. This made sure that his messages would hit home and make people think without forcing or pushing them. Jeremiah's understanding of people and the city's hidden currents grew stronger as he continued to watch, think, and prepare in silence. Every small insight, every subtle sound, and every gesture that went unnoticed helped shape his prophetic voice. He moved steadily toward the moment when his words would be clear, deep, and resonant, bringing to light truths that had been hidden for a long time, and waking up hearts to the unseen forces that were guiding their lives. As Jeremiah got closer to the peak of his early prophetic journey, he became more aware of Jerusalem and its people, to the point where he could almost touch them. He could feel the invisible threads that linked actions, plans, and outcomes all over the city. Every interaction, whether it was a casual greeting, a small act of kindness, or a word left unspoken, had the power to change not only the lives of the people involved, but also the lives of everyone in the community. The city, with all its busy activity, became a living tapestry of choices that were woven together. He had learned to read this complicated pattern with patience and quiet attention. The almond tree, which grew slowly but steadily, continued to guide him. The way it represented things, reminded him that it takes time and steady effort to really understand something. Wisdom doesn't come to you all at once. It grows over time through observation, reflection, and experience. The boiling pot, which was still simmering in quiet warning, made him think of the hidden pressures that build up slowly and are often not seen until they have to be dealt with. As a group, these symbols had become Jeremiah's internal guides, changing how he thought about timing, consequences, and the fine line between action and restraint. Jeremiah became even more aware of how people can act in two different ways. He saw how pride, fear, and routine can make people blind to the truth, even though moments of insight and empathy sometimes break through. Leaders may exhibit authority while lacking justice. Families may project external harmony while concealing internal discord, and neighbors may possess unacknowledged kindness. These differences showed how weak and strong human hearts can be. Jeremiah knew that prophecy needed to recognize this complexity and give advice that fixed problems, while also encouraging growth and reflection. The stillness of night became a holy place for thinking and making decisions. As Jeremiah walked under the dim light of lanterns, he took in the small signs of life: a whisper behind a closed door, a soft footstep in an alley, and the sound of leaves moving in the wind. Every detail showed hidden patterns of feeling, intention, and result. He got better at seeing the unseen currents that shape the lives of those around him by paying close attention and listening. These nighttime thoughts helped him figure out when and how to send messages that would wake people up without making them scared or forcing them to do something. Jeremiah also knew how important small acts of virtue were, even if they were often missed. A neighbor quietly helping those in need, a family taking care of each other, even when things are hard, and a teacher patiently guiding kids. All of these things showed that goodness is still there even when people are not doing the right thing. He understood that prophecy must strike a balance between warning and encouraging, showing what is wrong while also showing what can be done to make things better and how strong people are. Jeremiah's ability to understand timing, patience, and empathy grew stronger as he carefully observed and thought about things. He needed more than just insight. He needed to know when to speak, how to reach out to open hearts, and when to hold back. As he got wiser, he was able to find his way through the tricky balance between observation and action, which made sure that his eventual words would be clear, authoritative, and powerful. During this time of quiet preparation, Jeremiah's job as a guide and observer reached its peak. Every small detail, every subtle gesture, and every moment of reflection helped to shape a prophetic voice that could wake people up and bring to light truths that had been hidden for a long time. He moved steadily toward the day when his words would be full of wisdom, patience, and compassion, leading the city of Jerusalem to think, understand, and be morally clear. Finally, Jeremiah was at the end of his long journey of quiet observation, reflection, and getting ready. He had learned to read the subtle patterns of human life in the city of Jerusalem, with its busy streets, hidden tensions, and quiet acts of kindness. Every look, gesture, and whispered word had meaning that spread through homes, markets, and courtyards without being seen. He had the patience to see these ripples, the wisdom to understand what they meant, and the ability to know when and how to act. The almond tree and the boiling pot, two signs that had been with him since he was a young prophet, had become fully internalized guides. The almond tree reminded him that it takes time, steady attention, and quiet patience to grow, whether that means understanding, moral clarity, or human virtue. He learned to respect the pressures and effects that build up slowly, and often go unnoticed, until they demand attention from the boiling pot. These lessons changed the way he spoke, acted, and was ready to send messages that brought hope, warning, and reflection. Jeremiah now had a deep understanding of how people are both good and bad. He had seen pride, neglect, and fear blind even the most devoted people. But he had also seen courage, kindness, and resilience quietly stay strong. Leaders, families, neighbors, and even strangers showed in their small actions that they could make mistakes or do good things. He had learned that prophecy must include this complexity. It must talk about wrongdoing, make people aware of the consequences, and lead them to moral awareness, while also giving them hope and inspiring them to change. He learned many things from the nights, which had been his safe place to think and figure things out. Jeremiah had taken in the quiet sounds and movements of the city as he walked under the soft glow of lanterns. He heard the hush of footsteps on stone, the soft exchange of words behind closed doors, and the gentle rustle of wind through the branches of trees. Every little thing, even the ones that seemed unimportant, had helped him understand intention, consequence, and the unseen forces that shape people's lives. These lessons had taught him how to speak clearly and with compassion, how to make people think without forcing them to, and how to show people truths in ways that their hearts could understand. He also understood how powerful small acts of kindness can be. People's hearts are still strong, as shown by their quiet care for the weak, patient guidance of children, and acts of kindness that go unnoticed. Jeremiah knew that his words needed to honor this constant potential for good, even though they were full of warnings. He understood that real prophecy had to be a mix of warning and encouragement, light and direction, and correction and hope. Lastly, Jeremiah's patience, empathy, and ability to see things clearly had come together to create a prophetic voice that was ready to speak to the world. He was ready to guide, warn, and awaken hearts because he had carefully watched, thought about, and understood how human behavior and consequences work together. He could now speak with authority tempered by compassion, shedding light on the hidden currents of life in Jerusalem and encouraging people to think, reflect, and change. Thus, the journey that started with dreams of almond trees and pots on the stove, quiet nights of watching, and careful attention to the small things in life, came to an end. Jeremiah's story, which was about patience, understanding, and moral insight, showed how powerful quiet reflection can be, and how lasting the effects of observation and discernment can be. The city, its people, and anyone who would listen could learn about the hidden threads that shaped their lives through his journey. They could wake up to truths that had been waiting for a long time to be seen and felt.